Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 93 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris. I have an awesome guest for you today. John Lee Dumas, you may have heard of him. He is the entrepreneur on fire. And this is the guy that I learned how to podcast from. He has been doing podcasting for quite a while now. He's well known in the space, and he has almost 1,600 episodes out there of Entrepreneur on Fire. But not only that, JLD is making 7 figures a year, all built on the foundation of podcasting. If you are anywhere around the podcasting space, and since you're listening to this, you are, then there's a very good chance you've heard of him. But what a lot of people don't know about JLD is that he was also an Army officer, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. JLD continues to give his listeners what they ask for, and he started building out classes for people that wanted to learn how to podcast like he was doing. And then people wanted to learn about webinars, and he built out things for them. He built out entire membership sites like Podcasters Paradise, where I learned how to podcast. And then he moved into physical products with the Freedom Journal, which I have purchased a few of them, which helps you to accomplish your number one goal in 100 days. Building on the success of the Freedom Journal, John Lee Dumas just launched on Kickstarter the Mastery Journal, and he managed to break the $25,000 goal that he had. In fact, he broke it in a big way. He's up $280,000 for this Kickstarter project for the Mastery Journal. There are over 3,600 people that backed this journal, and there's a reason for that. I think you're totally going to understand what that reason is once you hear this interview. All right, that's enough of the backstory. Let me throw the bio at you and we can get into this interview here. John Lee Dumas is the founder and host of Entrepreneur on Fire, an award-winning podcast where he interviews today's most inspiring entrepreneurs 7 days a week. With just shy of 1,600 episodes and 7 figures a year in revenue, JLD has shown the world the power of podcasting. Prepare to ignite.
Jeremy, how are you doing today?
John Lee Dumas, how you doing, brother?
You know, I can't complain. Puerto Rico's sun is shining and our birds are singing.
Outstanding, outstanding. Well, I am so glad to have you on the Veteran Resource Podcast. It's been a long time since I started this, and I got my start really from you in Podcasters Paradise. So thank you.
Love hearing that.
So let me start off by just getting a little bit of background. I've already told the listeners about your background with Entrepreneur on Fire and everything, but I'd like to hear a little bit about your military background. Not a lot of people know about that.
Yes, I have quite the military background, and it started back in 1998 when I said, you know what, I'm going to apply for this thing called an ROTC scholarship because college is expensive, and lo and behold, got accepted to Providence College's ROTC program and said, you know what, all is well in the world, peace is ruling, so that's a good thing since I'm going to be in the Army. And I accepted it and spent the next 4 years as a cadet at Providence College, trained to become an officer. And fast forward to 2002, guess what? I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army, the first round of officers commissioned post 9/11. So we were real deal Holyfield stuff. And sure enough, a year later, I was in Iraq for my 13-month tour of duty, where I was an armor platoon leader, which meant I was in charge of 4 tanks and 16 men out in the western side of Iraq. So Fallujah, Al-Ramadi, Habaniya, and it was a pretty intense time.
Wow. And so what was your transition like when you were getting out of the military? You're coming from that type of a world and coming back into the regular world. What was that like for you?
It was tough, and it was actually 6 years of struggle. It wasn't overnight. It was where I got out in 2006 as a captain, And I was like, okay, the world's my oyster. I have no debt thanks to the Army, no college debt, no other debt, a decent savings account, again, thanks to my time as an officer. And let's do this. And I promptly spent the next years doing nothing but going in the wrong direction, net worth wise. As I tried law school and I dropped out after one semester. I tried corporate finance, and after a year of dying a slow death in the cubicle, I finally walked out the door. And then I tried real estate, and that just wasn't working for me. And again, this was not a quick period. This was 6 years of me trying to find my niche and a passion, something that excited me and fired me up, and just coming up short time and time again. And it wasn't until fast forwarding to 2012. So again, I want to reiterate, this was 6 years, from 2006 to 2012, before I came up with the idea to launch EOFire, Entrepreneur on Fire. And it's been quite the journey ever since then.
And when you did that, when you decided to launch Entrepreneur on Fire, most people would look at that, they see a podcaster, you're in there by yourself, you're figuring everything out, but you went to mentors, right?
That was the best thing I did, because I did a lot of things wrong during those 6 years. But when I finally decided that I was going to jump into podcasting and give it a whirl, I knew that I had to find people who were currently where I wanted to be. Now, I think that's worth repeating, because I think a lot of people go after mentors for the wrong reasons and in the wrong areas. I had to find a successful business podcast host to mentor me. Why? Because I wanted to be a successful business podcast host. So I had to find somebody who had been there, who had done that, who had made mistakes, who had had success, and could guide me in that specific journey. So that's what I did. I went out there, I invested heavily in myself, and I found two successful business podcast hosts. One was Jamie Masters of The Eventual Millionaire. She was my one-on-one mentor. The other, I joined his mastermind, Cliff Ravenscraft, the podcast answer man. And it was both very hefty investments, but it turned out to be worthwhile investments, as today EOFire's grossed over $10 million in revenue and is a multi-million-dollar a year business, starting again on that initial investment of mentors.
That's great. That is great. And I love how you keep evolving over time. I mean, you started out and you've got the podcast, and the podcast is successful, and you don't just say, okay, I'm a successful podcaster, this is what I do. You went on and you said, okay, I'm going to, create courses and communities, and then the Freedom Journal, and now you've just launched the Mastery Journal. For the listeners out there who know nothing about what this is, what is the Mastery Journal?
So the Mastery Journal was me looking at myself and saying, I've done a lot of things that have not been successful in life. I have really made a lot of mistakes. I have a lot of failures littering my path. But despite all of that, I have some really great strengths. I have countless weaknesses, but I have a few but very mighty strengths. And looking internally into how I was able to build a 7-figure a year business, I realized that it was because my strengths of productivity, of discipline, and of focus have got me to that stage. And again, they've overshadowed all of my weaknesses because I just focus on my strengths and look for ways to amplify that. So I saw a lot of people were struggling with 1, 2, or sometimes all 3 of those things. I mean, most people do struggle being productive day in and day out. Most people do have a hard time remaining disciplined to a plan of action. And in this world with a bright, shiny object syndrome is just everywhere, a lot of us struggle with focus. So I wanted to create a plan, a resource, like this step-by-step guide that was going to allow other people to master these 3 skills, to master productivity, to master discipline, and to master focus in 100 days. And that's where the Mastery Journal comes in, because it is that guide that you need to master these 3 skills in a step-by-step format.
That's great. When I'm having a great, awesome, productive day like I did yesterday, I'm working on this project with the Veteran Artist Program where we've got an art exhibit going up in 10 different VAs across the country for Women's History Month. And I had this incredibly productive day where I was working all day long and knocking stuff out and got it all done. But then there's so many other days where I feel like I'm working really hard, but I'm getting nothing done. So I could totally see where something like this would come in handy to be able to measure that and see maybe on those days, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, and that's where the Mastery Journal shines because, we all every now and then have those amazing days where we just knock things out of the park. But then, more often than not, we have those days where we just frankly come up short. And so you just need that simple guide that's just kind of prodding you along and making sure that you're self-evaluating yourself and doing, the proper reflections every day that we have to do to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And that's what the Mastery Journal is.
Excellent. And I'm a fan of your Freedom Journal. I've got one sitting right here in front of me right now, as a matter of fact. But with the Freedom Journal, you go back after, so many days, after 10 days, and you're looking back to see what it was you were doing, and you're reviewing. Does the Mastery Journal have that same functionality?
So the Mastery Journal does have a similar format in some ways, where the Freedom Journal, just to give listeners a little quick idea and rundown about what that is the first physical product that I ever created. Back in January of 2016, I launched the Freedom Journal on Kickstarter, which has a very simple premise. Accomplish your number one goal in 100 days. This is the guide that will teach you how to set a SMART goal and then accomplish that goal in 100 days. It has 10-day sprints going forward so that you're accomplishing micro goals every 10 days. Every 25 days, we do what's called a quarterly review where you look back and you see what's working and what isn't. And by day 100, you will have accomplished your number one goal. And that's something that I was really excited about, but I've been blown away by the response. I mean, we became the 6th most funded publishing campaign of all time on Kickstarter, doing $453,000 of revenue in just 33 days. And to this day, we sold over 19,000 copies of the Mastery Journal. So it's really exciting to, the Freedom Journal. So it's really exciting to see what's happening. And with the Mastery Journal, it's a different process. It's really more focused on your day to day. I teach and guide you how to master those 3 skills. Every 10 days, we do have what I call a 10-day recap so that you can self-evaluate yourself and have scores about how you're accomplishing your goals and desires of mastering these 3 skills. But it's really more focused on the intraday, and that's where the Mastery Journal thrives.
Ah, gotcha. So the reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast and specifically talk about the Mastery Journal is I feel like, there's 20,000 or more veterans who are getting out of the military every single month.
Wow.
And with that large number of military members who are transitioning out, I was thinking that the Mastery Journal would be something that they could use to transition and kind of hit the ground running. How do you feel that transitioning veterans could use this Mastery Journal?
So the thing about being a veteran, and that's something that I've experienced firsthand, is that you kind of go from this world where you have a chain of command and you have a duty list and you have a training schedule, and all you do, in a sense, is you follow the schedule, you follow the process. Now, of course, there's a lot of autonomy, especially for officers, and a lot of responsibility to create and to do these things. I totally get that, but it's always within the bigger picture of like an upcoming deployment or training or this or that. So you always have this plan of action laid in front of you. And the problem when you leave the military, you kind of just enter this void where all of a sudden there's nothing. And that's a scary thing, to go from having this mission, this focus, this plan, and to nothing. And I experienced it, and I struggled with that as well. And so what the Mastery Journal does is it brings back into your world this very regimented, formatted structure that you implement yourself in whatever direction that you want to move your life in. But it brings back that structure that's really going to resonate well with veterans.
Excellent. One other question I got before we sign off today. Out of all of the episodes in Entrepreneur on Fire, what do you have, like 1,500 now?
Yeah.
Out of all of the episodes, which one would you recommend to the veteran listeners right now?
Well, like you mentioned, there are a lot of episodes you could potentially be listening to. One that I really did enjoy, and not just because he's one of the bigger names that I interview, but just because the message that he shared was really important, I think, and can really impact veterans, was Tony Robbins. So I did a Tony Robbins episode a few months back, and that episode I think would be a great place for veterans to go, because that'll kind of unlock a lot of cool things for entrepreneurs and veterans going forward. So if you want to head over to EOFire.com, we have a search bar in our sidebar, and you can just type in Tony or Robbins, and it'll pop right up, and you can listen to it.
Oh, that is awesome. I'm going to go back and listen to that one. I got into a regiment where every single morning I was listening to your podcast, and this was way back when I first started getting into podcasts. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd put it on while I was getting ready, and yours was the one where I could count on every day. Like the other ones, once a week or once every couple of weeks, and yours was there every day. Yours was so inspiring by listening to all of these people that you look up to in the business world and in the entrepreneur world, and being able to hear some of their backstory, some of the stuff that you don't hear like in a seminar that you're sitting there listening to or something like that. I love how you dig up those pieces of information, like tell me about when things didn't go well for you. Yeah, so inspiring to hear that stuff.
Thank you.
Where can the listeners, where can they get the Mastery Journal?
So if you want to head over to themasteryjournal.com, you'll be able to learn all about the Mastery Journal. And of course, our headquarters is EOFire.com, where we have free courses in podcasting, webinars, funnels, goals, and also links to both the Freedom and Mastery Journal. And if you are a veteran, I always take care of my vets. So you can email me directly. I have a special promo code for veterans to get a percentage off their journal. So just hit me up and I'll make it happen for you.
Outstanding. And I'll make sure that I put that in the show notes, make it nice and easy for people to find you.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, John.
Thanks, Jeremy.
This has been incredible.
'Twas a blast.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to John Lee Dumas. As always, make sure you go and check out the show notes. They are at veteranresourcepodcast.com/093, and you can get the information about John Lee Dumas and follow the links over to EOFire, and also follow the link where you can find out more information about the Mastery Journal. Looks really cool, and I think that it could help a lot of you with your transitioning out of the military. One of the things that I haven't noticed the entire time since I rebuilt the website was that there was no way for you to contact me on the website. Sure, you could tweet at me, or you could follow me on Facebook and shoot me a message there. You could stalk me, until I get the restraining order against you. There's a lot of ways that you can get in contact with me, but on the website, there was nothing. So I created a new tab on the website, Contact, and you can go there and you can shoot me a message if you want to give a testimonial of the Veteran Resource Podcast. You can do it right there. If you want to shoot me a message and say, hey, you're doing great, or if you want to say, hey, I know this other organization that you haven't talked to yet, or this other thought leader that you haven't talked to yet, and you should really get them on the podcast, that is where you can do it, on this contact form. And if you want to just reach out and say, hey, your show sucks, you could do it there too. Really, I don't mind. I like feedback. Well, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast and for sharing it with everybody out there so that more veterans can find out about these organizations and get great information from these thought leaders. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will see you next week for episode 94.